Hi, I'm Keto. I'm a sorcerer from the Shafa Expanse. I was told that if I read this really, really quickly, that I might learn something about the Twin's Eye, and then maybe I could go home. So I'm gonna cast haste. Oh wait, shoot, what's happening here? Oh no, no, not again. Hey guys, the tail came back. Oh, what was I supposed to read? Shoot, you're listening to the campaign spotlight. I gotta go take care of this. Okay, bye.
All right.
Hey there, hirelings and hierophants.
Welcome to another episode of Campaign Spotlight.
This week, we'll be chatting with Max about incorporating OSR elements into your campaign.
Let's roll initiative.
Do you want to kick us off with the monologue about your campaign?
Yeah. Okay. So explain what the concept here is, because I've been thinking about this. I might have kind of like a meta response to this a little bit, be annoying. But I remember having you guys kind of tell me, like, yeah, you had you like to have people kind of intro with how they would intro a session or something like that. And it got me thinking, I don't have any particular way that I intro sessions.
Yeah, so it's more how you would intro a campaign, right? It's the very first session of the game. Our story starts in a tavern. It's a cold and rainy day. A mysterious stranger sits by the hearth. But obviously not necessarily that. But kind of how would you kick off the first session of a campaign you've run? And then the idea is that that's the part that's going to get the most intensive, Riley audio production. And we'll talk about this later, but also Riley will compose music for each episode as well that kind of matches the tone of that monologue.
Oh, I love it. All right, cool.
Yeah,
well,
right.
I love it. Well, let me give my best I can here.
Hell yeah.
And we'll yeah, I mean, I'll just I don't know if it'll be a super long one, but I'll basically give the intro for the newest campaign I gave.
Oh, this is the D&D the old school D&D one, the basic expert one.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, perfect. Absolutely. Okay, I'll mute myself.
Cool. You find yourselves in a tavern, the Broken Axe, in the small lumber town of Duntide. You see a number of missives posted up on the wall, one from Father Fulton at the chapel, one from the local lord, Dennett Duntide, and one about a fallen star some ways out of town. You get sideways looks from an elf hireling seated in the corner across from a dwarf and a number of humans, and the mute bartender, Cutthroat, polishes a tankard standing behind the bar top as he kind of scans across the room looking for trouble. Who do you approach?
Wow. I was flustered. I was like, oh gosh, who do I want to approach?
Which, for the record, horrible hook prompt. It should have been more active, but that goes to show, it's a little outside the norm for me. But yeah, I hope that was good. I hope you throw a couple tracks to that and you got something dramatic going there.
I have boundless confidence in Riley's ability to make music that will make that sound extremely cool.
Awesome.
Max, welcome to Campaign Spotlight.
Thank you for having me. I'm stoked. I've been looking forward to this. I'm sorry I couldn't, do this in person. I came down with a rather shitty cold. I don't know. Is swearing okay?
Swearing is mandatory. Yeah, we need multiple profanities every session to justify the explicit rating we've given this very non-explicit podcast.
Beautiful. Okay, cool. Well, then I'll get as much mileage out of that as I can. But yeah, no, really been looking forward to it. I know that you guys have really done a great service for my wife, who now has a few less hours of listening to me talk about tabletop, thanks to the two of you. So yeah, no, happy to be here.
You're actually not the first guest whose partner has been like relieved that they're not the only outlet for hearing about the campaign. So maybe we need to like contract with like marriage counselors about this. Anyway,
yeah, absolutely. Though I will say, my wife's an absolute trooper. She's now in our campaign.
oh, that's really exciting.
Yeah, it is fun. Also, I don't know what this says about me, but she's like the only player who's had like multiple characters die so far. But yeah.
Oh, I absolutely could never. My boyfriend's in the long-running campaign, and you'd better believe it's like, hey, what's your hometown like? Maybe we should visit there first. Maybe you should get a cool item or two. And the other players all kind of glare at me because they know that's happening.
It's a real hazard. It's a hazard.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit, I guess, about your experience as a player and as a DM.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So I mean, I guess I'll kind of just start in chronological order. So
Sure.
Which by the way, I looked over the topics, but that was a while ago, so I'm coming into this fresh as hell.
Exciting.
So yeah. Anyways, I don't know, man. Like, my last year of high school, or maybe like just out of high school. 5th edition had just come out. I think that was like a year or maybe two outside of high school. And we got it. We got the starter set. My brother got the starter set specifically. And we ran the first couple sessions of Lost Mines of Phandelver, which, has now since become like one of the most like highly regarded 5th edition modules. But I had no idea at the time, and we all were literally running like the pre-made, literally printed in the set by Wizards, pre-written characters, right? And so I rolled like a wizard, not realizing like how much of a fucking idiotic idea that was for like a time. And we got a couple sessions in. It was me, my sister, my best friend at the time, and a couple of dudes I was playing in a band with. And we got a couple sessions in, and then we got to, spoilers for Phandelver, I guess. We got to a young green drake who I was rude to, and my brother got annoyed at me, and he Dragon Breath TPK'd the party, and then everyone got mad, and everyone went home, and I didn't play for a couple years. Until I moved into a place with a couple of buds, one of which Riley knows very well. And we were living in Seattle, and a good buddy of mine, Ryan, who honestly would be like a tremendous person to talk to in his own right, had consistently been playing, and he'd been playing since 4th edition, so he's a true believer. And he started something with us, and it was just us, right? So my buddy Lucas, my buddy Figgy, myself, and Ryan DMing, and this was just kind of the roommates playing in the basement every couple of weeks, bi-weekly basis, and we played for probably about 3 years, and then moved out. One of that group started another campaign, and we all kind of continued there, and then it's kind of been like a what are those races where you like pass the baton? It's kind of done in these stretches.
Like a relay race?
Thank you. I always forget the word relay. It's like a relay race, right? And so it's kind of just been this relay race of like first Ryan ran, then Figgy ran, then I ran. And I kind of started my own group, and but there's kind of been this consistent DNA for probably the last, I guess, 7 or 8 years now.
Wow, that's a long time to be playing with the same people.
Yeah, and maybe I'm overstating it a little bit. I mean, my current group, the current iteration of that line has probably been going about 4. But yeah, it's kind of been this off and on with different members group, and yeah, it's been a total blast. I mean, we're overwhelmingly mostly have been a 5th edition group, and then I actually got my start playing Call of Cthulhu as far as game mastering goes, and played a lot of 5th edition. I started running 5th edition eventually. Played a pretty long and rewarding, I would say, kind of story forward campaign, which I would say, I mean, not to like fail to keep my powder dry here a little bit, but I would say that story driven is probably the culture that 5th edition kind of cultivates.
I'd agree with that for sure.
Yeah, and then after doing that, I've, in the last few months, so really in the grand scheme, I'm fairly fresh to OSR style, but in the last maybe more than 6 months, I've kind of started to get into that. And at this point, we have like 3 different campaigns going, several others left hanging. And each member of my current group runs their own thing for us, and we basically take turns. So this whole thing about like there's not enough DMs and things like that is very much not the case with our group. In fact, there's kind of competition for who gets to run the game each week. But anyways, yeah, I hope that's an adequate answer to your question there.
That is a wild dynamic that I've never encountered, that everyone wants to DM. I am envious not only of the continuity of this group, but also of the enthusiasm for running things. You mentioned you've started running OSR style games. Do you mind describing for the audience what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just smoking a little bit. So yeah, so it's OSR. I guess I'll just start from like square one, right?
For sure, that would be awesome.
Cool. So OSR stands for Old School Renaissance or Old School Revival, kind of depending on who you're asking. I think it started around like 06, maybe a little earlier, with just like a lot of blogs, and really kind of took off. This is kind of funny to say now, but like on Google Plus, it was pretty popular. It's like the one subculture you can say that about, I guess. And it's basically exactly what it says, right? It's old school game design, and there's a lot. There's a shitload of games under the umbrella. The one that we've been playing is called Old School Essentials. Old School Essentials is what's called a retro clone, basically a restating and kind of reorganizing of the rules of basic set D&D, specifically the 1981 Tom Moldvay basic and expert set of Dungeons and Dragons. And it's, I'm getting a little specific to OSE right now, but I guess just to zoom out to OSR in general, it's usually rules light. It's usually a lot lighter on rules. It's generally more lethal, but that's kind of its own thing that I try to be delicate with, because I think this meme kind of comes about of like, it's just all about killing players, and I think that's like a fundamental misunderstanding. And I would say, and this is where I originally really got into it, it's a lot more exploration centric, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with this kind of like design axiom that people talk about in 5th edition, but there's 3 pillars of gameplay, right? So people say this a lot with 5th edition. There's social, combat, and exploration.
Yep.
Right? And
yep.
It kind of speaks for itself. But the main thing that kind of got me into OSR was that I was running a campaign, and we did a hex crawl. This was my first hex crawl, right? And I realized that 5th edition has no coherent rules for doing a hex crawl or doing overland travel, right? And so I made my own, right? And then I basically learned, like, then it kind of goes from there, right? I start going like, okay, well, like, what about dungeons, right? Well, no one I know that plays modern D&D really even bothers to run dungeons, right? And so then I kind of start looking, and I start finding like these older editions have like procedural modes of play for wilderness exploration and for dungeon exploration and things like that. And so anyways, that's my meandering. You'll find that a lot with my answers, kind of my meandering answer to your question there, which is basically rules light, high lethality, and kind of exploration led gameplay.
I think that's the great definition of what people tend to find appealing about OSR, other than, the ability to kill off difficult PCs. Let's talk a little bit more about this idea of exploration, because I think that's a really helpful framing of what this kind of system does. First off, when you talk about hex crawl, what does that look like in terms of the experience of a player in a game that's really focusing on that kind of overland travel and exploration?
You said just define hex crawl?
Yeah, that would be great, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because it's not lost on me that this was perfect timing. Last weekend, I went out of town and I actually played a 2 or 3 session long kind of mini campaign with people who had never played OSR before, and it was kind of a perfect primer for this. And the pre-written module that we ran was a hex crawl. And so I kind of explained it to them, which is basically a hex crawl is a procedural mode of play, kind of like I said, where land is divided up into hexes of a particular size, right? So standard, and what I play, is 6-mile hexes, right? And you basically run travel through the wilderness by doing wandering monsters. You have a keyed map, and it's a really great way of kind of just imbuing your world with kind of like a sense of danger, obviously. And I mean, I kind of hate this word, but like verisimilitude, right? Like there's an authenticity to it. So it's one thing to say like, well, we're at a remote dungeon and you're carrying a lot of shit and you need to go back to town. But for all the more stuff you're carrying, just understand that like you're going to be more compromised on the walk home. It's one thing to say that, and it's another, for that, that extra treasure chest that the party picks up to mean the difference between, 3 more opportunities for them to encounter a dragon on the walk to town or 1, So yeah, and honestly, like there's modern hex crawls. Curse of Strahd has a hex crawl in it. They don't need to be 6-mile hexes, but yeah, that's basically it. The one that I ran, I did my own kind of homebrew thing of the Neverwinter Woods. I did a hex crawl in the Neverwinter Woods, and how I like to do hex crawls personally is because I don't like to populate hexes very much. I think that it's a little too daunting a task to populate every hex on your map. I populate a few, and then I like to have nested tables, right? And so every hex that the party is entering into, they have a chance to, encounter like a miscellaneous kind of social encounter, a natural hazard, right? Fucking quicksand or something like that. They have the opportunity to encounter like a ruin or something, and then as they're rolling these, I'm marking the map accordingly. And yeah, so that's hex crawl. That was actually a hex crawl was one of the first adventures I ever did, actually, even in 5th edition, I remember. So yeah, no, a lot of fun.
Your point about adding this sense of, maybe verisimilitude is not the right word, but this idea that it's forcing people to think about the logistics of actually living in the world they're playing in and not just kind of narrating a stylized version of it, that's really well taken. On the exploration front, couple questions. First off, Are the players drawing the map as they explore?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll intro this by saying, like, this kind of gets to, for me, like, the whole point about rules light that people say with old school gaming, which is you can run it rules light, or you can run it crunchy if you want. I like rules light. We've been coming from like a very story focused kind of rulings over rules type culture at our table already. And so, sorry, I just lost my train of thought again. Repeat your question.
Oh, my question was about mapping. And so you said you want to really focus on exploration. Are they actually just discovering what's in the wilderness around their village and drawing it out on a map as they go?
Exactly, right. So then that was what I was getting to. Sorry. So there's like stated rules here and there of like people should be a mapper in the group, and you should like be giving narration that gives a really coherent idea for mapping. But again, per like what I was saying, like I like to play kind of loose. I like to let the fiction of the world be the main thing. And so we generally end up having someone who's mapping, but like it's by no means required. And usually half the fun is that it like ends up being completely incoherent. And by the end, when I like to show the players like a map of the dungeon and stuff like that, just to be like, look how off you had it. But yeah, like that's an aspect of it. One thing that I don't find particularly like agreeable about overland travel and mapping is that a big mechanic, and this is what makes, you know, a class like Ranger really effective in old school play, is that getting lost is a really, really big risk and mechanic in overland travel.
Right.
And that, in my mind, kind of ruins the mapping for the player. You know, if there's a contradiction between what they're being fed information-wise and what's actually happening, at that point, like, I can't... their map's going to be garbage, right? So, I don't put a huge emphasis on it. I've run... the last 5th edition campaign I ran was a hex crawl. It was completely hex crawl based. I actually overlaid a hex grid in Photoshop over a full world map of like Faerun.
Wow.
And just quantified movement through the entire world per the official material. And it was actually set in Thay, but I actually had that be an open map, right? So everybody had access to it, and we were moving a little cursor on like a web browser based app, and that was fun. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways of handling it.
That makes, and I think to some extent we have a lot of the norms when we play these games, right, are going to be informed by the fact that we've all played video games, and mapping is one of those tasks that pretty much every game has automated for us. And I think a lot of the time we come to the table with this expectation that we're not going to have to, keep elaborate tables of stuff or freehand draw maps, because compared to people playing in the 80s, we're probably more used to having that automated. And so maybe that is part of why it feels a little more appealing to have that open map that everyone can kind of look at as you move.
Totally. That's an interesting thing, right? Video games, like the connection with video games, is such a dicey thing, right? I was thinking about this today because we're trained by video games to look at the game in so many specific ways.
Yes. Right?
And I think that, at least for me, right? And I want to clarify here really fast that, like, I've been a really slow learner, and I've gone through so many different phases and styles of running the game. And it's been this slow rolling thing of realizing, like, this connection that I want to make with video games a lot of the time is coming up against this other thing, which is that I need to, like, let go and let just the vibe at the table and the energy and the collaborative storytelling aspect of it that's very much antithetical to video game design philosophy. I need to let that take over. And it's funny. I mean, I certainly don't want to make it sound like I'm saying, well, if this is your approach to it, then you have the wrong idea. But at least in my experience, that part of my brain that's like, I want this to be, like Skyrim or Baldur's Gate or something, right? Like that's usually the part of me that's like wrong. That's like wrong. And I think about this a lot. I'm totally running with this concept that you just casually threw out, but I think about this a lot. People that are really into public speaking, just like the absolute psychos that are into public speaking, have this thing about, well, yeah, it's public speaking. When you're giving a speech, don't memorize the speech, right? Because then, right, so you might have heard this before, right? So, because then you're contorting yourself to perfectly restate what you're remembering, as opposed to just memorize the broad strokes of it and allow yourself to actually talk like a human being talks. And that is the single biggest thing with prepping D&D that I've found. And I think that video game mind part of my brain, is just like, well, I'm just going to statically define everything in this world. And then it's no big deal. Like, I'll just have this reference to go back to. And that totally screws me up. You want to say something?
I just think that it's interesting that you're characterizing kind of the vibe at the table and the socializing as part of what makes the tabletop experience, uniquely different than other kinds of games and uniquely enjoyable. I absolutely agree. And to me, that's why I've stayed away from OSR style play. Because this idea that you're out there exploring and that the focus is really on looking at the world around you and having the sense of wonder and danger and potentially, knowing that you can't get too invested in this character because there's a real chance they might die. Mm-hmm. To me, that feels kind of video game-like, right? And to me, it feels like, well, if I'm going to run a world like that, I don't know if I can compete with Baldur's Gate or with Elden Ring or something like that, compared to a game where it's really social and there's a lot more of that vibe at the table, politics, intrigue that is maybe not what OSR tends to focus on, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because it's more gamist, right, as a design philosophy, right? There's specifically procedures. There is a what's the likelihood that like a pressure plate trap is gonna set off if I step on it? There's a rule for that, right? Which is funny because ironically, like old school design generally has less stated rules for everything that you need to look up, right? But yeah, I mean, I think that the assumption that a lot of people make is that like the kind of old school system, oh my gosh, you're tracking torches, you're tracking arrows. This is like a game about this is a game about like measuring and tracking your fingernail growth or something.
Right, which is something that my computer can do for me if I'm playing a video game. Right.
I think there's a couple things, right? Which is okay, the openness of the rule set. Okay, right off the bat, I'll say that's not how OSR gameplay needs to be, right? At all. It's going to entirely depend on the culture at your table. And I'm lucky enough to have like the best fucking D&D group that I'm aware of, right? I mean,
I'm so lucky.
Well, I mean, it really is like you come away from certain things trying to be like, okay, what can be learned? What worked there? What didn't work there? And it's like, so much of the time my answer for things is just like, well, I just have a good group. But also, there's something really light and flexible and dexterous about the basic set in how simple the rules are, right? So I don't think you can fully appreciate until you've sat down at the table with those exact expectations you're talking about, right? And then seen it move just totally differently than what you're expecting. And then finally, the last point just being about the lethality thing, right? The best point that I've heard about it and how I like to think about it is, and again, this is kind of an over-dramatized way of putting it, but like, don't write a backstory for your character, because the first adventure will be their backstory. Now, obviously, like, I like to generate some background traits for characters at my table, and if somebody wants to do a backstory for their character that's not like, I'm the fucking prince of this kingdom or something, you know, or like I'm a fallen god, then like, go for it, you know, don't go crazy. But the emergent storytelling, the collaborative storytelling,
Right.
is where the good stuff always was all along. And so there's like an incredible amount of investment I find in the characters. Yeah, so I guess it's just you know, there's probably a ton of people that are super gamist, that like to just play it like a video game, this old school kind of dungeon crawl style, and for them maybe it is less role play and everything, but if anything, I would say that like the nimbleness and kind of quickness of the system tends itself more to what you're describing than what people think.
That's actually really helpful to know, and this is really a perspective I haven't heard at all in these OSR games. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit more about the basic expert campaign that you've been running. What's the overarching concept of that?
Honestly, my overarching concept of it is binders, and this is gonna sound like a joke, but basically, like, I'm running it entirely out of a binder. Right? And I've kind of systematized this whole thing to be this modular thing. And so it's just important to say, because basically it was my way of going, I'm not going to allow myself to just rabbit hole into just coming up with an entire planet and then having that inevitable thing where it becomes really cumbersome and I get overwhelmed, and then like a year from now I'm stuck in some kingdom that I thought about for 5 minutes a year ago, you know, and I feel bound by this. What I'm doing is I'm developing the world one region at a time, right? And so currently, this is the intro I gave. Currently, they're in a I kind of like the idea of like a Green Hill Zone, you know, Green Hill Zone being like the first level in Sonic the Hedgehog, right? Like just have a really idyllic, almost kind of cliche starting area.
That's what Tolkien gave us, right?
Right, exactly. Right. So this Shire-esque. So this is an area, kind of a largely forested area. It's right on the edge of a great kind of fey forest, and there's a trades guild that has huge holdings in the region for like lumber industry and things like that. Obviously, there's kind of a bit of tension, you can tell, and animosity between the local like kind of populations of elves that dwelled in this forest that's now being exploited, and you have the guild on the opposite side of that, and then kind of as a third wheel, there's kind of the Church of the One that has a presence in, you know, various chapels, clerics, and yada yada yada. And yeah, I mean, the hook is just trying to do the most sandbox that I can possibly do. And so what that looked like for me was I did a town, mm-hmm. and I did 3 dungeons, and I just gave them, like I did in the intro, I just gave them 3 hooks. And I tried to clearly state the reward so that it wasn't just 3 equal choices, but it was like, okay, well, like, maybe the cleric would want this more, and hey, maybe the wizard want, you know. And then I just created kind of a situation. I created a location with nothing that even smelled faintly at all of like a linear story path.
Right.
And I've kind of just let them go from there. And they've been to 2 of the 3 locations. And when I'm bored throughout the week, I'll just write up another dungeon.
Sure.
And I'll just slip it into my binder. And then when I get the motivation for it, I'll just poke a Sharpie dot somewhere on my hex map and say that's where this is now. Or I'll just tie it with a random table, and that's basically it.
And so each of these modules that you're developing is literally just a dungeon, and then after the dungeon, they come back to town.
Yeah. So BX runs on gold for XP.
Right.
So gold value specifically. So, doesn't need to be liquid assets, right? It can be you recover a gold head of a statue. It's worth 100 gold. It's worth 100 XP. And so this is always it's drawing them out into the wilds to go to a dungeon, and it's drawing them back to civilization to secure the experience from it.
The economist in me is always quite worried. This is absolutely going to cause hyperinflation, right? This town's economy was a lumber mill, a tavern, and a church, and now there's just so much gold flowing through it.
Right.
That's going to be a big problem for just the price of basic goods and services. Sorry, this is way off topic. What was I actually going to ask you?
No, I love it though.
How are the players liking this style is the question that I should have asked you. Are they enjoying this setting where they go from dungeon to dungeon? Are they kind of looking for some kind of linear overarching plot that's driving everything? Or are they pretty bought in on this style?
Yeah, so, good question. So first of all, the nice thing is I had already started running 5e in an OSR style in the last campaign we ran. And so they kind of got this a little bit already. They've been reacting to it well. It's fun because it's challenging in some ways, in that it's a lot like what we've been playing for years, but just different in certain other ways. And it's adjusting your expectations, right? It's totally the antithesis of just that, oh, well, in my last group, we fought an owlbear, and so now, in this group, in a party full of people that have never seen an owlbear, I know how many hit points it's going to have and what its AC is, roughly, and I'm going to fucking own this thing, right? No, it's totally different. It's all the same, but kind of a little different, and generally more lethal. So they're digging it. There was a big... Well, it's funny, right? Because I get a little paranoid about it, and I'll check in and be like, how are you liking it, right? And there was a big, low point in morale a little bit, but it was awesome when, for the first time, and we've played for fucking years together, they're in a dungeon, and they're going, and it's good, and then suddenly things kind of start going wrong, and then things start really going wrong, and then they're in the death spiral, and they stop towards the end of the session, and they go dude, we need to go back to town. We need to stop what we're doing, go back to town, get more supplies, heal, and then come back later when we're more prepared. And that was the first time we'd ever done that in a game, right? And it was huge. And I think that brings a lot of excitement with it. And so, yeah, they're having a pretty good time with it. And I guess the one other thing that I'll add, because I think that this has a lot to do with the players, but it honestly has this is more relevant to kind of my experience a little bit, which is, running a sandbox is really simple in that you just at the end of the session, ask your friends, which I hope you can. I hope you can talk to your, just be communicative and just be like, okay, cool. What are you guys doing next week? What are you guys doing in the next session, I should say. And then just prep that. Literally just prep that. And so, it's like launching a rocket ship, right? 90% of the fuel is burned off just to get off the ground. So yeah, you prep a town, prep 3 dungeons. It might take you a little bit. But then at that point, you're just jumping from week to week on what they tell you. What it's like in a video game, how it's just rendering what you can see on the camera.
Right.
Just prep that way. And then if they do end up turning around and going in the opposite direction, just have systems in place to where you can bullshit it in a way that feels good, right? So for me, that's random hex crawl tables. I generally have a few random miscellaneous dungeons on hand because I just like making that. But yeah, just And this is how we're, we just had our kind of 5e cyberpunk campaign session last night that we've been running for a while. And that's exactly how my buddy's been running that as well, right? You just, whatever direction we start going in, just like start filling that in.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense for this kind of gameplay. Do you have in the back of your mind, I guess at some level in these OSR campaigns, everyone is so powerful that, and has so much gear that it gets to be a little more difficult to have a dungeon be challenging when everyone can fly and teleport and do all these things. Do you have some big end game in mind that they're all working towards?
Oh, in our current campaign?
Yes.
Yeah, so again, that's another cool kind of thing about BX is it, again, like, just there's modes of play that are formalized, right? And a big component of that is early levels, dungeon crawling. Mid-range levels, you're doing wilderness exploration. And then higher level of play, you're doing domain play, right?
Yes.
So, like the capstone ability, basically, of a fighter in Basic is you can hold land and build a stronghold, right? The capstone ability of a magic user is you can build a wizard's tower and get 1d4 apprentices that come and work under you. This is like a bullet point. There's no huge crunchy number system behind that.
Yes.
It invites you to just get creative and do the role play aspect of it and have that kind of loosey-goosey vibe-based gameplay at the table. And so, that's kind of the answer is, by the time everybody's totally OP, you've basically shifted to they're like the lords of a keep or something, and they're probably now hiring a fresh group of adventurers that your friends are now playing, right? And again, right, that adds a whole other dimension of that collaborative storytelling, right? I mean, what does the process of the party picking up a quest look like when it's now kind of filtered through this layer of like, well, what's this high level character's interests in the world? How is the player going to express that? They're giving the quest to the party now. I mean, it's very cool. And again, that's another thing. I mean, fuck, there's nobody saying that you can't do this in modern D&D.
Right.
But that's a thing that everybody has always bitched about in D&D is high level play. The wheels start kind of falling off, and that's true. And that's also true. And keep in mind, BX also was continued as the BECME system.
I don't know the BECME system. Can you talk a little bit about that?
BECME, God, I'm gonna butcher this, but it stands for Basic Expert Companion Master.
I'm gonna look this one up. Yeah.
And Immortal. I can't remember the M. The M is the hard one. Point is, it's basically somebody going, people love Basic. We're gonna continue it to 36 levels or 38 levels or something.
Oh wow.
And that's not really a very good idea, right? But it's also cool because BECME exists, right, as in 91 they published the Rules Cyclopedia for BECME,
right.
Which is, at this point BECME is the longest lasting D&D edition ever, right? And what they do is they just take all of the rules and they put them all together in this book, right? And so by my estimate, it's probably like the best value of like a D&D product ever. And it's not really as tight and consistent as Basic is, but it's cool because you can reference it and go, okay, well, like, what are some things I want to add, right? Maybe in my campaign, I want to follow their druid rules and have it be that the only way to become a druid is a cleric at level 9 whose neutral alignment can go Ted Kaczynski and just go live in the forest and stop, following his god or something. Anyways, just in the long and short of it, though, is just there's kind of this nice aspect of design philosophy, which is they have an answer to that question, and you can jettison their answer and just keep your party dungeon crawling until level cap, or you can take that in. But this perfect balance of just having an answer to these questions and not having it bloat the system with mechanical complexity.
I think that is an optimal trade-off. I mean, I will say that one holdover, I think, from that style of gameplay where you do become the Lord of the Manor, or you become the wizard in the tower at the end, is that 5th edition has all these high-level wizard spells that basically only make sense if you're going to build a wizard tower.
100%.
And, like, I've always wondered, like, when would you use Sequester, right, which just hides an object? But you're going to do it if you're going to be, like, the evil wizard running the dungeon. That's the only use case for some of these spells, as far as I can tell.
Totally. Or, like, what is it? Is it Meteor Storm or whatever? Like, it's just, like, some of these offensive spells, it's like, you're not, like, this is like army-based gameplay.
I'm running right now a campaign that's set in space, or, like, Little Prince-style space.
Dope.
And Meteor Swarm is on the table in that one because it's thematic, and also because it gives them kind of a nice Chekhov's gun to have a scroll of that. I don't know if any of them are listening to this, but anyway, I guess they'll find out about that soon. Also, you were right; it is basic, expert, companion, master, immortal. I just looked it up.
Okay, cool. Right, and so each of these books, right?
Yes.
Are, think Tasha's and think Xanathar's, where they're an extra, except more formalized, they're an extra layer piled onto the original source books.
Yes.
But, there is basically a linear progression between the source books of 5th edition, but they're not quite as, like, formalized, where it's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of thing.
Right.
And similar to basically every edition, they get a little crazier and crazier. I mean, fucking A, again, like, Immortal, it's literally called Immortal tier gameplay. You're getting to, like, level 36. Like, it's bullshit, right?
Yeah.
But the cool thing is it's built on a foundation that's simple, and because it's simple, it's incredibly modular. Yes. And because of that, unlike a lot of... I think about it as a concept that I had it described as is like open system versus closed system, right? So let's think old school. One of the big things, old school D&D doesn't have skills, right?
Right.
So you want to climb on top of the roof of a building. Well, that's not a good example because, well, let me think of something. All right, you want to haggle a merchant, right? All right. In old school play, I'm going to, like, require you to either, like, make an actual persuasive argument to this merchant, or if I want to be, like, a little more mechanical about it, I can just have you do, like, an ability check with charisma, right?
Right. But you, the underlying player, are having to do quite a lot of that thinking.
Exactly. In my way, the way I think of it, that's very immersive, right?
Yes.
Versus kind of a more, and that's an open system, right? There's, it's less formalized. There's no specific answer to how you do persuade, as opposed to a more modern system. It's like, okay, obviously that's going to be this one specific skill, and the game has, and in that way, it's much easier to do kind of homebrew or kind of just stretch the system in a way that works for the culture of your table. And that's one thing. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Pardon me. But stretch the system in a way that doesn't require you to come up with a new haggling skill, for example.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Like again, it's just, if somebody just, like, really nails it at the table and just is just giving the most persuasive argument to this merchant, and everybody's just wowed by it, and that's, I kind of hate the word vibe, even though I keep using it, but for lack of a better word, like, the vibe at the table is that everyone's loving this shit that this guy's belting out.
Yes.
Just literally let him succeed at the thing he's trying to do, right? As opposed to then going, okay, but, like, we're still playing a game, roll persuasion. Or in a very similar way, right? Disarming a trap, right? If they come up with a really good idea, I mean, we were playing. Okay, here's an example. We were playing Pirate Borg, which is a mod of Morkborg, which is an OSR kind of like similarly rules light OSR system, right?
Cool.
And we're in a dungeon. This is recent, and there's a horde of cultist pirate treasure in this temple, and it's all on a treasure plate or pressure plate, right? But it's kind of an inverse pressure plate in that if we take the treasure off of it and it lightens, it will fucking shoot up spikes out of the ground.
Right. Indiana Jones style.
Exactly, right? It's the bag of sand for the you get it, right? And so we went to another room and we got all the chairs and tables out of the room and put them on the plate, right? And then did the counterweight and there's no roll for that.
Right.
Right? And if an extenuating circumstance comes out, right, it gets stuck, or the table gets stuck in a, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
I don't even like that though, right? There shouldn't be a roll in most circumstances there, because it's simply enough for the character or for the players, to be engaging with the world, right, and be engaging with the lore and genuinely thinking creatively about it, right? That's the big thing, right? Creatively. And I think that skill systems are cool. I mean, I like Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu is 100% a skill-based system. But I think that the issue that you run into from that kind of foundation, the superstructure of that, is that I think that it creates this. I've heard people say like this sense of like piloting a mech in a modern system, a more closed system, because everything needs to get passed through that character sheet and go like, oh, well, what's the rule for this? No, there's not. Fucking pick up the tables and put the chairs there.
Right.
You don't need to look at your sheet at all for that. I love it. I love this type of fiction, and it really, it wrings out the creativity. I find you're really getting a lot out of the scenarios you're in, and it really shies away from that effect that I've found that happens where you're in just kind of like this kind of like funhouse ride. It's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in Disneyland or something, where you're just like going past these like combat encounters that you're just absolutely shitting on.
Yes.
Which again, and I want to say as a quick side note, I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but for as much as I'm being critical of modern game design, I love 5th edition. Right?
It's fun, yeah.
Played it last night. I think it's an awesome system, right? I just think that it's harder to talk about when you're telling somebody that they should play a game that was published in 1972, right? It's kind of hard to make value statements about that without comparing it to the modern version, right?
Especially when the modern version is the one that everyone they know plays.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So you're describing the situation where on one hand, the rules are relatively light, and the DM is kind of trying to figure out on the fly, well, here's how we would resolve the situation. Right. And on the other hand, for the players, they're really being rewarded for the underlying person making a creative speech, and not like the character saying some nonsense for 10 seconds and then adding plus 11 to their roll, right? And on one hand, I see why that's really appealing and really helps with that immersion in the fiction. On the other hand, this seems like something that is only going to work for relatively experienced tables, right? Like, this requires players who are very dedicated and invested and have played quite a bit before with the same DM. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, in what specific ways would it be more difficult? Are you saying?
So I guess when we think about let's compare OSR type systems to 5e, right?
Okay.
In 5th edition, if I'm trying to haggle with a merchant, I have like a really high persuasion modifier or deception modifier or something, I can just say something that is clearly targeted towards that modifier with like pleading eyes towards the DM, right? And what I'm saying might not be great, but we all know, oh, I have a bardic inspiration, I have guidance, I already have plus 11 to this. When I roll those dice, we're going to get a 30, and the merchant is going to go along with it.
So
right?
here,
and go for it.
here's my thing. Right? I think it's a great point, and thank you for teeing up a point that demonstrates what I love about the system so much.
Sure.
Two things, right? Okay, your friend comes over, and they're playing the face of the party, and like their dog just died, and they're having like a horrible day, and you're like, hey, you need to haggle with this merchant, and they're just like not doing a super objectively good job because like they're just not in it or something. I mean, I'm coming up with the most garish example.
Yes.
That would be simply absurd to be like playing the game is gatekept, like is being locked behind how you're acting at any given time. I mean, we run fairly long sessions, right? And so by the end of, by the 5th hour of our session, that's maybe not. Well, yeah, we're about 5-hour sessions.
Wow.
People are fading a little bit a lot of the time, right?
I can imagine, yeah.
And so, again, rulings over rules. BX has ability checks, right? It's roll under your ability score, which again makes it simpler.
Sure.
And so if you have a high charisma character, and you're just having one of those like, dude, I don't know, I don't want to like get thespian right now. Can I just like mechanically have an answer to this encounter in the system? Make a charisma ability check. Now, I think that that's not a good default to have, right? I think that the game leading with like, this is an imagination creativity game. The first solution to things should try to be imaginative, creative, interacting with the world. But yeah, I mean, being flexible, right? So yeah, I think that the game has that same answer to it. I would push further by saying that I actually think that what you're kind of describing, that modern thing of like, well, I have guidance, I have friends, I have +4 in persuasion. We were kind of putting this in the context of like new players, right? I actually think that that's overly gamist in a way that's actually probably more off-putting to new players, right? Because they're playing a board game, whereas they thought it was originally more of a creativity game, and their creativity isn't really quantified in that system there, right? It's just them being told, well, add this number and add this number and add this number. I think that system works really well and is really well realized, like in tactical combat. But there is something like a little bit frustrating about, trying to persuade somebody, having a really good point, and then you like fucking critical fumble and your character like poops their pants, and suddenly my character's like not behaving at all like I thought that they were. And, so that would be kind of my counterpoint.
That's reasonable, and I will say I have experienced that as a DM, where a player playing a cleric was like helping a ghost move on in this beautiful way, and mechanically it did call for some kind of roll. And I said, you can do it with advantage because your roleplay was so great. And the cleric rolls a 2 and a 3 on 2d20, yep. And suddenly I do see what you mean. It does a little bit undermine that moment where, in retrospect, if I did that again, I probably would have just said, yeah, you helped this ghost move on in a beautiful way. Exactly.
And I think that the skill system creates everything looks like a nail when you have a hammer type thing. And it's like, it's, what am I trying to say here? Well, there's two things. So 3rd edition introduces DCs, like dice challenges, right? And so you as the DM are choosing a DC for every skill check, yes. Right? Okay, so like maybe like this door, it's fairly reinforced. We're going to say it's a DC 15, right? Okay, that system works when you're stating the DC out loud when you're calling for the roll, but that basically never happens, and I never remember to do it. And so what ends up happening is, because everything looks like a nail, you're calling for skill checks for everything, right? And then you find yourself, and again, I'm speaking from my own experience, right? I'm the worst offender of this. You're calling for a skill check for fucking everything, and then you find yourself calling for skill checks for stuff where you don't actually want the players to fail at all, right? And then what happens is your druid rolls a 2 or a 3 on, like, the climax of their character arc or something.
Right.
And then you have to suddenly go, oh, well, like, actually, like, it was a DC 3 all along. So, like, it's okay. You've succeeded, right? Or I like doing things like that. And obviously, in this case, no one does it for a 3. 3's so low. But I think that there is something nice to just doing, like, this game is encouraging you to, not everything needs to be a dice roll, right? And when it is, right, when it is a dice roll on the rare occasions, the challenge rating is static and it's open knowledge. It's just their ability score on the sheet, right? You've got an 18 wisdom, right? Do a wisdom check in this druid's moment or whatever, and anything under an 18, at or under an 18, is a success, right? I think that there's, like, kind of a nice clarity to that, and again, I think it creates, like, an authenticity. There's something like magic in tabletop about being like, the goblin is there because everybody knows, everybody has been told where the goblin is, and now, like, you can't, it's not just imaginary because it's in everyone's imagination together, right? You can't just on a whim think to yourself, well, now the goblin's over here, because everyone is living in this shared reality that the goblin is standing where you said a second ago, right? And
yes.
And having the difficulty backed up in that way, and the stakes is really, really important. I don't know. I kind of just went on a tangent about, like, the DC system.
But I think the DC system kind of illustrates, let's talk about from the DM's point of view. I think the DC system kind of illustrates a situation where 5e maybe does make things easier for a beginner DM, right? Because if you're in a situation where your players want to do something really challenging and the characters are at a really low level, it can be, and what they're saying is ingenious, but, it still might not work. Ingenuity might not be good enough. It is hard as a new DM to reward their ingenuity without making it kind of, well, you can talk your way into all of you flying to the moon in our second session, right? Like you can say, okay, yeah, you've built this rocket ship. I'm going to need a DC 30 Arcana check for it to fly you to the moon. So I think that from the point of view of a DM, sometimes having all those different skills and being able to say, okay, the players want to do something, I don't know how to handle that narratively. Maybe it is nice to have 15 or 20 different roles that I could try to slot this into and just shout out a really high number, and if it happens, it happens, right?
Yeah, so that's no, and I think that's awesome, right? Because what you're kind of speaking to there is world building that's taking place on the character sheet, right?
Yes. So
the fact that there's an arcana and a religion and a history skill tells you something about the setting that this game is going to take place in. And I think that's awesome. I think that that's a strength of the skills in that way. And I do think that it's a trade-off, right? And I think that a big aspect of tabletop is almost kind of like that user experience, the way stuff is laid out, the way information is presented, and how it can kind of take form in your mind. For some people, I think that the skill system can be great as an introduction.
Right.
I think it just depends on the way people think. I mean, again, it's hard for me to even judge because that's also how I learned to play the game, right? And everything goes in these kind of neat slots. I agree with that point there. I think it's a good one. It's just, and this is kind of this is kind of a good segue into a kind of another point, which is just, I've had this kind of arc where I got really tired of running 5e, and I kind of got really down on the system. And then now I've kind of come all the way back around to where I like really appreciate it. I like it a lot. And I think that's the case because I just kind of understand like everything after 3rd edition is like a completely different game. And so
Sure.
basic, while it has beholders, right? And it has attack rolls and all that shit. It has saving throw. It's D&D, right?
Yes.
It's a fundamentally like different game
Then
right?
5th edition, absolutely, yes.
Exactly. It's like Monster Hunter and Resident Evil are both on Capcom's game engine, but like they're completely different games, right? And basic is Resident Evil, right? I mean, it's a survival horror game, and and so I think that kind of helps, and it also opens you up because again, hammering on this imaginative, creative aspect of the culture of play. I think there's like a huge DIY creative thing in the culture of OSR, and that game really kind of wants to bring out in people. And I think if you get like a little less like sectarian about your additions and everything, you can look at stuff in modern D&D and import that into your BX game and vice versa, right? I've played 5e, a campaign that ran for a while with formalized dungeon crawling turns from
Right.
BX, and it's fucking awesome, and everyone likes it. And I run BX with advantage system and inspiration and shit like that. So, yeah.
This is actually a great segue into what I was curious about when you talk about, importing these rule sets or importing just elements or flavor. What are some resources that you found particularly helpful in doing so? Like, what would you recommend to someone who's, let's say, ran a lot of 5th edition or similar, or Pathfinder 2nd edition for that matter, and wants to start incorporating this? Are there anywhere you'd point them to get started?
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, like, right off the bat, I would just say, like, old school essentials, being a reprinting of Moldve basic rules, is the single best put together tabletop book I've ever seen in my life. And maybe this won't translate quite as well to PDFs, but it's still great in PDF form. Is everything is reduced to 2-page spreads, and this is a digest size book. So it's like the size of a normal book, and everything in the game is 2-page spread. So every class entry is a 2-page spread. Everything about combat is 2-page spread. You don't need to flip back and forth for anything, right? I think it's perfect. I think it's a perfect book. You can literally, just even in the inside covers, they have the full rules for the entire sequence of play of dungeon crawling, of wilderness travel, of hiring retainers, of everything. Wow. And it's all in bullet points. And part of that is, again, it's this weird, almost contradictory thing. Like, there are so many more rules that cover exploration gameplay, but they're all so fucking simple that it doesn't actually add any real crunch. And so I would say I would recommend that. Read OSC, read that, and start out by running a dungeon. That's the easiest thing, right? 5e isn't about dungeon crawling. 5e is about tactical combat. It's a war game, right?
Yeah.
And of course, like we still play it in the really role play heavy social way that a lot of people do. I mean, we ran a session last night that didn't have any combat in it, right? That's really common for us. But but the system itself it's a tactical war game, right? It should be played on a grid, that kind of thing. I hate running combat on a grid, but and so I think the best way to get into it, if you want to incorporate what I'm talking about into a modern game, is to design a dungeon and then figure out what isn't supported in the system you're playing and look at some of these old systems,
Yes.
and run it procedurally and you'll be like amazed. The way exploration turns work, it breaks everything down into 10-minute long turns.
Yes.
And you print out a time tracking sheet, and so it has little blocks you're Xing out, and it has little like letters above, every hour your torch burns out. Every 20 minutes you roll for wandering monsters. Having it just be, it's deceptively gooey and not really it doesn't bog gameplay down at all. It actually helps keep it moving in this way that I never would have believed before I started doing it. I would say try playing an adventure with those rules. In 5th edition can completely handle it.
Absolutely. And
that'll be, I think, the best introduction I can recommend. I mean, that's what I did. That's literally what I did.
That sounds like a great recommendation. For your current campaign, are there any, I guess, books or video games that you might not expect that you'd want to read beforehand, or games that you played, shows that you've watched that have inspired the current campaign that you're running that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been getting into the old school stuff lately, and so obviously a lot of stuff that's in the culture in old school gaming, and what a lot of those people kind of talk about a lot of the time is like sword and sorcery and sword and sandals kind of pulp fantasy. And I find that that's like really not very as popular in the zeitgeist these days, in the culture these days, because everything's a lot more certainly like coming from like a Tolkien point of origin, which is funny because Gygax like didn't even like Tolkien.
Really?
It's very strange. I mean, Gygax like also like he loved Conan so much that he like hated Magic users, didn't know why anyone would want to play him. But there's a lot of questionable, design decisions. But just goofy. But so I don't know. Like I just watched like Ralph Bakshi's Fire and Ice the other night, and it fucking ruled. Watched Conan again recently, just out of to get inspiration. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from. I really love Souls games, so I mean, just kind of anything Miyazaki, Dark Souls style, I love. I'm really stoked to watch. I haven't watched it yet, but apparently there was like this short film called like The Dark Angel or Black Angel that aired in some countries before Empire Strikes Back. And it's like this 30-minute dark fantasy 80s short film that's apparently like fucking amazing.
This is called Black Angel.
Yeah, Black Angel. I'm excited to watch that. Probably in a much more real way, I would say that's where I'm coming at it from. But I'm one person at the table.
Yeah.
And so it's all the other stuff that they're into, right? I mean, I can give you a bunch of recommendations that'll help you create that initial town in 3 hexes, right? Town and 3 dungeons kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But after that point, like, dude, it's like whatever your characters have been into, and so they're just, and that's the fun thing, right? I mean, it's a way of allowing yourself to still be surprised at the way the game goes as the DM.
I really love that philosophy, and I need to be better about that myself, to be honest. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to plug other than that?
No, I don't really have anything to plug as far as like tabletop culture or anything like that goes. I'm thinking about maybe getting into like publishing a module
Very
in the
cool.
future. So maybe if I come on again, I can always plug myself if I've
absolutely.
published something.
I look forward to having you on the show again and hearing about the module.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Thank you so much, Max, for making the time. It's been great to chat with you.
Yeah, thank you. This was a blast.
That's all for this week.
Thanks so much to Max for coming on Campaign Spotlight.
I'm Dungeon Inspector Jake.
And I'm Production Master Riley.
If you're enjoying the show, subscribe and leave a review.
Helps other people find the show, but hopefully not the Blood Witch who's been trying to track down our families for 7 generations.
For more on the show, including links to all our social media, visit foldedfrequencies.com/campaignspotlight.